So nice to see all of you here. Bit of a cool, wet night after such a sunny, beautiful day. It's hard to believe that was in the forecast, but here we are. I hope all of you got a cookie and a tea. Welcome. This is Take the Plunge. I'm Rebecca Wood-Barrett, and we are very grateful to be here on the unceded territory of the Squamish and Lil'wat Nations. And tonight we're going to hear 5-minute readings of many different genres from 9 local writers and enjoy a reading from our guest author, Leanne Dunic, from her new book, Wet, which will be available for purchase from Sarah, who's come here from Armchair, our favorite indie bookstore. And Leanne will be able to sign copies as well. I just want to say thank you to all of our readers tonight, because I know some of them, it's their first time doing this. So you do have to be really brave, even if you've done it before, to get up in front of people and read your work. And especially if it's new work, maybe a little fresh. So thank you for being brave. We'll have an intermission in the middle, so you can get more tea, more cookies. And we also have our book sale, which is a fundraiser for the Whistler Writers Festival and the Authors in the Schools programs. And the Whistler Writers Festival this year will happen, mark your calendars, October 17th to 20th. And it'll be held at the library here at the Fairmont Chateau Whistler. And it's 4 days of reading performances, workshops, and industry events. So look out for that. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, that's the best place to find out about all the information. Before we get started, I'd like to say thank you to all of our volunteers tonight and our volunteer board, who are working really hard to create a lovely, welcoming literary community. And we're also welcoming new volunteers. Donna tells me, there she is. Give us a wave, Donna. So if you're interested in volunteering for the festival, let Donna know and she'll keep track of you. Thank you to Mountain View Accommodation, Sarah from Armchair Books for coming, Natalie Doron, who's our volunteer from the library, and the Whistler Public Library for holding this beautiful space for us. Yes, thank you. And we are just going to dive straight in. Brandon Barrett is an award-winning journalist and editor who spent 10 years at Peak News magazine. He's the co-producer of the Big Fat Comedy Show. He's also a comedian, actor, playwright, and proud board member of the Whistler Writing Society. Thanks, Brandon.
So this is a piece that admittedly won't be as literary as some of the great writers to come, I'm sure. So I'm hoping they'll pick up my slack. But this is a reported piece of nonfiction based on, nervous. I don't usually get nervous for this. But this is a reported piece based on a trip I made to the West Bank in Palestine in November of 2022. It's called King Abdullah. There's a palpable nervous expectancy in the air when our taxi pulls up to what seems to be the only open convenience store in town. About a dozen expats are spread across the front stage, sucking on popsicles and downing cokes to stave off the oppressive heat. The muggy weather doesn't seem to bother the locals, though. As they filter out of the nearby mosque, they clutch tiny paper cups filled with thick Turkish coffee, chatting amiably with neighbors and family. Kufr Kadum is a small town of a few thousand located in the northern West Bank. Like several other communities in the occupied territories with one-way in, one-way out access, Kufr Kadum residents' comings and goings are completely controlled by the Israeli military. Under blockade for the past 22 years, they're intermittently choked off from their olive groves, their jobs, their school, their hospital. Since 2011, locals have organized weekly protests every Friday, regular acts of defiance intended as a reminder they aren't going anywhere. It's not uncommon for a handful of foreign protesters to join the fray as well. In fact, it's a sardonic Englishwoman who serves as our de facto guide for the day. She offers helpful tips on things like how to clean tear gas out of your eyes and the best way to absorb the impact of a steel-tipped rubber bullet. It's with your butt. My anxiety rises as we prepare to set off. Then I notice something out of the corner of my eye that puts my jangled nerves somewhat at ease. A little person, no more than 4 feet tall, starts walking, no, swaggering through the crowd, parting the sea of 100 or so protesters. As he does, practically every local in sight shouts a greeting his way. King Abdullah, which he receives with stolid grace, steely determination in his eyes. Now, I'm expecting Abdullah to stop walking at some point, maintaining the line separating us from the gathering soldiers and their armored vehicles about a kilometer away. But he doesn't. Continuing his strut, someone hands him an oversized Palestinian flag, still illegal to fly, and without missing a stride, King Abdullah marches on, braving whatever's to come. With the rest of the protesters following behind, chants of "Free, free Palestine" echo through the streets. Young men in keffiyeh slingshot rocks piled onto the hood of a beat-up hatchback, creeping forward in reverse. Affectionately dubbed the Palestinian tank, the back seat is stuffed with old car tires, offering some cover from rubber bullets or worse, rifle fire. Soon enough, the distinct ka-chunk of tear gas fire sounds and the sharp sting of acrid smoke coats the back of my throat. Hidden behind a cement slab, I snap a photo of a donkey tied to a tree, calmly munching on grass as chaos and smoke envelop him. In that moment, I remember something beloved Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish said about the donkey being the wisest animal of all, having had to bear witness to man's folly for generation after generation. I wonder what the donkey thinks about all this. We push forward close enough that I can see the weary eyes of teenage soldiers staring back at me. But Abdullah has a better vantage point, mere feet away from the rifle muzzles fixed tightly onto him. He waves his flag furiously with one hand, pumping a defiant fist with the other. I wonder how this ends. There's a strange, almost ritualistic quality to it all. Both protester and soldier alike recognize no rock is going to take down the fifth largest military force on the planet. But what I've come to understand is it's less about the rock than the throw. One of the organizers told me the community vowed a long time ago they would never spill another drop of their kin's blood. Too much has been spilled already. So when things get too heated, they retreat. Some weeks, the army pushes them all the way back to the convenience store. On this day, however, the army retreats. The tension evaporates. Cheers ring out. People break into dance. Palestinian press set up their cameras to interview a triumphant Abdullah draped in the flag. From a distant bird's eye view to the cynic looking in from afar, it's a small victory, but not to it's a small victory, but not to Kufr Kadum. There's this beautiful concept I learned about in Palestine called sumud. It translates closeness to steadfastness, but the words used to me were everyday resistance, the kind of terminology that makes some in the West want to renew their gun license. But really what it means is to love in spite of their reality, in spite of the blockade, in spite of the occupation, to find and capture and relish every single moment of joy like a butterfly in a jar. Today, Kufr Kadum takes its win. Tonight, Kufr Kadum will dance, but they won't dance forever. Friday is only a week away.
Thank you, Brandon. Next up is Libby McKeever. She is a retired youth librarian and a graduate of the Simon Fraser University's Writer's Studio and SFU's Writer's Studio Graduate Workshop. Young adult and historical fiction with a twist of fantasy are Libby's writing realm and choice, but she has recently delved into the novelization of her Australian grandfather's life. Let's welcome Libby.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's kind of scary, but it's wonderful to have an audience. So my reading today is from my current work in progress. It's a novelization of my granddad's life, and the year is 1913. My granddad, his name is Alan Kahn, and he's 24, and he's an experimentalist with the Australian Sugar Refinery. And he is seconded to various farms in northern New South Wales to test the new varietals that they've been working on in the lab, and he reports back to head office. So this section of the story follows a catastrophic amount of rain and subsequent flood that destroys the Cunningham farm where he's currently working. The roads are blocked, but he decides that he's going to strike out on his own for help. And aside from Alan, the other character in this piece is Mrs. Pierce, and she's a local widow who cleans at the Cunningham farm. Alan discovers that the slope above the Finch's home has slumped, and the house is now hanging precariously over a flooded river. And the scene starts with Alan, he's inside the house already, and he's found Mrs. Finch pinned to her bedroom wall by her iron bed frame. She's dazed, obvious pain, but she's still conscious. The bed frame began to move, slowly at first, then it found its traction, skated away down the sloping floor. Mrs. Finch slumped as she was released from her iron trap. As I moved towards her, there was a groaning from the front of the house, followed by the sound of ripping wood. I threw my body and grabbed her upper arm, pulling her behind me as I worked my way up the now sharpening slope, crab crawling us to the window. Remarkably, this wall had not warped, and the window slid up clean and true. I thrust my leg over the sill and pulled Mrs. Finch up onto my lap, wrapping my arms around her chest to pin her arms. I looked down. We're at least 20 feet above the river. As I hesitated, the house thrust up with a lurch. The whole structure was collapsing. There was nothing for it. Rolling my body out, we fell into the wind and slammed into the churning water. The river flooded around us. We were swept away in my head, barely above the water, as I tried to foist the woman onto my chest. Roused by the crash, Mrs. Finch shrieked and began to rise in panic. My guts squeezed. Her thrashing would sink us. "Hold still or you'll drown us both," I yelled, spitting out a mouthful of loamy water. With her head against mine, my hand cradling her chin, lost my spot. We bobbed in the mass of brown. Unknown obstacles beneath the water slammed into us and snagged our clothes. I fought to keep our heads clear of the surge as I wrapped my legs around her, angling our bodies into the flow. A wave crashed over us, the swell causing her long nightgown to billow up around us. It caught my arms and wrapped me like a shroud. I thrashed as I frantically tried to free my right arm, my only means of propulsion, our escape. Again, my head dipped below the water, and I heard a bubbling scream and realized this time it was mine. We were tossed into an eddy, spun, and for a moment I lost my grip and her fingers thrust up to claw my face. Her wide eyes stared at me, a pleading panic in her pale face. "I can't swim!" Her last word was drawn out in a scream, and we were hit hard by a piece of metal, a fencing post, a vehicle. It shocked me into purpose. I twisted my hand under the binding fabric and curled my fingers around the gown and yanked as hard as I could. The garment resisted and then with another tug came away like a gossamer thread, freeing my torso. I pushed my arm outward and making use of the pull of the flooding river, I was able to steer around the obstacles. I saw a narrowing up ahead and a surge of hope swelled in my chest. The bend rushed up to greet us. Surely the water would slow. Too late, I saw the obstacle, the cause of the stream's stricture. A searing pain lanced at my side and we smashed into a wedge tree. I lost my grip and I was pulled under. My body sucked through a gap between the log and the river bottom. Eyes wide open, the water somewhat clearer here, I reached for a broken branch. Its limbs speared the water like rungs on a ladder, and using them as such, I heaved myself up against the surge and broke free. My mouth wide, gasping for air like a fish on a line. I looked round until I saw her. Working hand over hand down the log, I reached the limp form of Mrs. Finch. Eyes open but unfocused. She was skewered in a V between some branches. Miraculously, she seemed uninjured, pinned in place, momentarily out of harm's way. And that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Libby. Next up is David Song. He is the sports and interim arts reporter for Peak News Magazine. Originally from New York City, he's a huge sports fan who finally started trying to improve his own fitness as a beginner kickboxer and CrossFit guy. David tries to balance writing for fun with his journalism. You can often find him watching movies, playing video games, hanging out with his friends, or working with local youth at Whistler Community Church. Let's welcome David. Thank you.
Thank you. So back in 2011, Bethesda Studios released a first-person shooter video game called Brink, a game set on a floating city experiencing a revolution and cut off from the rest of the world. Now, this being an online multiplayer-focused game, Bethesda, in their wisdom, decided that it did not need an actual story to go along with the gameplay. In my opinion, they were wrong. And so in 2024, I decided to take matters into my own hands and write what they weren't willing to. Home. Captain Kendrick Azimuth-Bourne stood on the highest balcony of the guard tower, looking out over the city-state of Atlantis. As usual, the glass and metal palaces in the Crucible glistened in the early morning sun, sparkling like the cobalt blue waves laboring endlessly toward the horizon. Looming above it all, like a sentinel from a higher realm, was one world tower, 900 meters of what appeared to be carved ivory. It was, of course, the nerve center of humanity's greatest achievement, the place from where the Presidium governed. Azimuth considered himself a pragmatist, but most mornings, he couldn't help but gawk at the splendor of the view outside his office. It was majestic, and even a grizzled soldier like him could admit as much. But then his eyes traveled beyond the gilded boundaries of Atlantis's wealthiest district and over to its poorest. The sanctuary wasn't supposed to be run down, but decades of overpopulation and questionable resource management had caused its once attractive infrastructure to fall into disrepair. Sanctuary buildings looked like faded relics of a bygone era, except that they were very much in the here and now. Instead of reflecting the sunlight, they absorbed the gazes of conflicted onlookers like Azimuth, who couldn't help noticing the great disparity in the city-state. Most sanctuary houses and apartments were meant for single families, but now they accommodated 3 or 4 each. A dearth of vacant real estate forced small business owners into the streets, and most hawked their wares from tents. Roads, once meant for motor vehicles, were now jammed with winding snakes of bicycle and foot traffic. After all, who outside of the Crucible could afford a car? In fact, some sanctuary residents could not afford an apartment either. Instead, they lived in portables, hastily fabricated dwellings protruding from the sides of older buildings like warts. As more and more civilians were forced out of the Crucible due to economic hardship and political maneuvering, they were forced to think outside the box in order to house themselves. Portables were plain and Spartan, but they were also cheap, modular, and easily reconfigured. They were functional, and they weren't the lowliest residences in Atlantis. That dubious honor belonged, of course, to Container City, an increasingly vast slum that occupied the sanctuary's south end like a malignant rainbow-colored tumor. True to its name, the area was dominated by shipping containers that had been pressed into service as makeshift houses, dive bars, brothels, and other dens of vice. Container City was home to the most disenfranchised people in Atlantis, many of them criminals who had finished serving their prison sentences, but were considered high-risk offenders. Azimuth shook his head. He was neither a politician nor an activist. He was a soldier, and it was his duty to protect civilians from unsavory lawbreakers and potential threats from the outside world. Debating the socioeconomic problems that had gripped Atlantis for well over 3 decades was a job for those more eloquent and educated than he. All Azimuth wanted to do was gaze upon the serenely grand view from his balcony for a few short minutes, before another one of his tightly scheduled days began in earnest. He'd arrived at the guard tower early for that specific purpose, to enjoy a moment of calming solitude where he could ground himself in preparation for the many tasks demanding his attention. Yet the price of such solitude was often a persistent dose of conscientious conviction. Try as he might, Azimuth couldn't just marvel at the Crucible's wondrous architecture or the unrivaled beauty of sea to sky all around. The sanctuary, and in particular Container City, was always there, an egregious splotch amidst an otherwise breathtaking landscape. In the past, he was able to ignore it, or at least to look without feeling much guilt. That was no longer true. Unlike protesters, young and old, who nowadays took to sanctuary streets on a regular basis, Azimuth knew that the issues facing Atlantis were complex. Yet he also knew that as captain of the guard, he had a platform to make change if he so desired. The question was, what kind of change would actually produce good fruit? After all, the last thing anyone needed was a repeat of the July uprising. Azimuth glanced down at his state-of-the-art military-issue wristwatch, canceling his alarm seconds before it would have rung. It was time to get to work. Thank you.
I sure love that world building.
Yep, I sure do.
He knows I'm a bit of a sci-fi fantasy nut myself. Next up is Mary MacDonald. She is the author of a short fiction collection, The Crooked Thing, published in 2020 by Caitlin Press. Her short stories have appeared in Room magazine and nonfiction essays on birding and the feather trade as feature pieces in Peak News magazine. Her chapbook, Going In Now, was published in 2014 by Nozen Book Publishing. Love that name. She has written poetry for ballet, public art, and libretto. Let's welcome Mary.
Tim, shorty. So I'm reading new work from a collection I've just finished, all about birds. And the collection has the running title of Flight Path. So a while ago, I got kind of a tough medical diagnosis. And my brother, who's the composer, wrote me a composition. And when he sent it to me, he sent it with a poem by the German poet Theodor Rocky called In a Dark Time, the Eye Begins to See. And I'm just going to read you the first stanza of that poem. It's called Between the Heron and the Wren. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood. A lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heron and the wren. So for a long time after he sent me that poem, I pondered that last line. What on earth did Theodore Rocky mean by I live between the heron and the wren? And like a lot of poetry, we don't really know. So we come up with our own answer to what that means. So after all this, I received all this stuff. The composer died. And this is a poem I wrote for him called Between the Heron and the Wren. Saturday morning, rain comes in an unrelenting drizzle, light on the skin, cool, nothing that's going to stop anytime soon. The cadence of my bike wheels spin, my mind naming the things I pass. Small wooden bridge,
Lamppost I never saw before. Graffiti. The end of the world is nigh. Squirrels in a hurry. Red maple trees blazing in the last dance. I can't stop thinking about children being safe. Don't step on the crack in the sidewalk. Suddenly, the world that surrounds me, I'm not so sure. I notice two herons, one in the air squawking, loudly nudging the other. I think they're having a tiff. The large one pecking at the smaller bird. Watching is irresistible. The elder is forcing the leaving. The young bird resists. I take my eyes off the road for a minute. A man slips into the shimmering stream. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anybody. One loss does not give back another. Leaves are still falling. The creek is still rushing through the valley. It should be dark, but it isn't. I ride into the woods, with as you on the names, cedar, hemlock, Sitka spruce. Patches of radiance enter the canopy. Now I want everything. Dream your body here. Under branches, seedlings, mosses, shrubs. I hear the loud chattering of a winter wren. The little rotund passerine scampering along a dead fir tree, singing with vigor. The lulling reprise of the rain, the wet scent cleansing the earth. I have come here to weep, yet in every moment, the light turns to me. Thank you.
Beautiful imagery, Mary. Thank you. All right. The next person is Matthew Dykstra. Born in Kingston, Ontario, his family had moved all over Canada due to his father's work with the RCMP. Growing up, he had a close relationship with his mother, who I think is here tonight, who helped him deal with his ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. He got into fantasy stories through a little novel by the name of Crondor, The Betrayer, by Raymond E. Feist, which eventually led to a 10-year journey into writing a fantasy series that has consumed his life. All right, come on up, Matthew.
Thank you, Rebecca. This will be the first time I'm reading this in public, so I'm a little nervous. I shall be reading from the ending excerpt of my first novel. The ending excerpt of the prologue to my first novel, which has been titled A Rise of Heroes. The prologue is called Invasion. From behind, the midnight-robed cultist, Hendrie, approached the lead cultist in maroon, Quella, who exuding a calming presence after the stressful interaction with demons. Congratulations, Master, although there was a small interruption. Hendrie looked towards the corpses of slit-throated sacrifices, bloodied on the sands of the arena. The ceremony went off without any problems. A light grunt came from Quella. Yes, without any problems. Quella swiftly turned towards Hendrie and gripped his left shoulder. At the same time, Quella felt a sharp pain in his gut. Looking down, he saw that Quella had drawn a blackish red knife and stabbed him where his liver was. A cold warmth washed over his body as he looked back at Quella, surprise and shock in his eyes. I've known for quite some time, Hendrie, that you were a spy. Quella slowly removed Keldray's mask, revealing a young human man. He had short, curly hazel hair, light brown skin, and black eyes, with a yellow cross and red filling in the rest. Keldray snarled at Quella. Fuck you, vile creature. The Eye of Argent will stop you. You'll never win. Quella stopped gripping Keldray's shoulder for but a moment, for a loud, boisterous laugh came from their throat. Oh, but I already have. Quella touched his own mask and removed it. Keldray's expression changed from one of defiance to slow horror as the realization came to him about who he was with this whole time. No, can't be you. You're dead! Quella just smiled at Keldray. As you can see, I'm far from dead. Keldray dropped his head towards the floor in defeat. Then the rumors were true. Quella chuckled at that. Rumors are only half the tale. Keldray was pushed to his knees as the shadows, fueled by magic, began to chain him in place. You're outnumbered. Quella's face was forced up. Keldray's face was forced upwards towards Quella's own. You failed your mission. Keldray screamed out in agony as the blackish red knife carved out his left eye. Our war is over! Keldray saw his eye in Quella's scarred, nailless, blood-stained hand as he proceeded to pocket it into a pouch, turning back to Keldray. You lose. Keldray's last glimpse before the knife carved out his remaining eye, leaving him into an endless darkness, was the face of a scarred man with short silver hair. The right side of his face, just above his mouth, was red, skinless muscle, and one lidless, unblinking eye of black with a yellow cross and red filling in the rest. Primus casus belli innocentia. The first casualty of war is innocence.
That was fantastic. All right, our last reader before the intermission is Jane Silcott. She writes essays and stories loosely organized around the puzzles of love, duty, and self. Her first collection, Everything Rustles, was a finalist in the BC Book Prizes. She is a co-editor with Fiona Tinway of the anthology Love Me True. Writers reflect on the ins, outs, ups, and downs of marriage. She lives in Vancouver with her husband and a moody cat and writes in the attic. Welcome.
Thank you. Moody meaning half feral. It's hard to follow all these great readings, but I'll try. I'm going to read a little segment of an essay I'm working on about voice. About 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a condition called spasmodic dysphonia. And the cool thing about it is there was a band called the Dysphonics, and I found a little review there in England somewhere. And the review said, even though the amp blew out during that performance, it was a really good show. So this, kind of gives me a little lift. Anyway, it's quite a rare disorder, though there are some famous people who have it. And it causes the vocal cords to spasm and can make some people sound whispery, some sound as if they're about to cry, and some as if they have a bad cold or COVID. It can make it tiring to talk, hard to be understood, and a strain, especially on the phone or through a mask. Microphones help. So does voice therapy and Botox. I could go on and on. I won't, because really my case isn't that bad and I've had treatment recently, so I'm fine. The main thing is coming down with some weird thing that changes how you are, makes you fascinated about the body and how it all works. So I've been working on just understanding voice, and I'll read this short bit about visiting a jazz singer in our neighborhood for singing lessons, well, voice lessons. I sign up for the lessons through the singer's website, and even though I know we're going to focus on speech, I still follow the instructions to learn 2 songs before the first class, because who doesn't imagine that someday they're going to be discovered suddenly, maybe even at age 68, and will become an overnight singing sensation, the likes of which no one has ever heard before. My first song is Blackbird by Paul McCartney, and it's not bad, but my second, Closing Time by Leonard Cohen, is terrible. I get to the singer's studio through a wooden gate with a small plaque on it that says musician. Through the gate, there's a small bricked-in patio, clematis vines growing up the fence and through the trees. I feel like I've entered a secret garden. Inside, the singer, a tall, willowy woman with long puffs of over-dyed hair, kind eyes, and a voice like a bell, waits. She smiles and welcomes me, and we talk about tremor. At that point, I'd been told that part of what I had was an essential tremor, and I like that phrase. It sounds important in an elegant kind of way. My father had a tremor later in his life in his hands, and so that made me think of him too, and how he was elegant. And that made me in this small, it just made me think of him, feel like he was still, a part of me was still with me, of him was still with me. The singer told me to lie on the floor. Let the wood hold you, she said. Let your back muscles relax. Feel how the floor is supporting you. Then she said, get up and sit in the chair by the piano. See how your back is just naturally straight? And I think, no, I don't know. Is it? I can't tell. I'm afraid to move. Afraid if I think about it too much, it will just go back to its usual posture. And I'm shy. Don't look at me slump. Think of the body as an instrument, she says, a guitar. The belly and the lungs are the engine, the vocal cords, instrument, an instrument, not an engine. The belly and the lungs are part of the, I'll just read. The belly and the lungs are the engine, the vocal cords, the soft palate, the tongue and the teeth are the strings, and the head is the resonator, where it's hard not to think. Really, the head, a big hole with bones and eyes and sinuses and a mushy brain that resonates. She hands me straw. Blow through this. It helps you warm up your vocal cords. After, the singer plays 2 notes on the piano. I don't know what they are, but let's say it's C, E, E, C. And she sings with them. I am to follow, and I do. Her voice is like a plum, rounded and smooth. This is very shallow of me, but I'm focusing on her throat, which is long and smooth and willowy, and I'm envious because mine is not. And my voice is not willowy either. My singing career fantasy dies a sad little death here. My voice, wavery, uncertain, wants to go home and hide itself. I reimagine my late in life career to backup singer, way, way backup singer. Maybe tambourine player. And if you'll bear with me for one more paragraph, because I love Leonard Cohen. At a Vancouver concert years ago, Leonard Cohen stepped away from his band and went to a mic at the side of the stage and recited a poem. It was the best part of the concert. Just his voice, deep and graveled. The whole arena was quiet. Not a cough, not a sigh, not a rustle. Just words moving through us. Ideas made whole and touchable. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Jane. Beautiful lightness in there. So this is time for tea, and use the washroom, which is off to the left there. Have a cookie, and also a great time to buy some books. They support the festival, and also Leanne's book, Wet, which is for sale with Armchair Books. So we'll do 15, and then we'll be back for a few more writers. Thanks, guys. Based in Whistler, BC, and hailing from rural Quebec is Pierre-Olivier Gaudreault. He is a writer, mountain athlete, and environmental change agent. He had his first story published as part of an anthology called Awfully Hilarious: Stories We Never Tell in 2023, which became a bestseller the moment it was released and won the Canadian Book Club Awards Reader's Choice for Best Anthology in 2023. Let's welcome Pierre-Olivier.
Yes, exactly. Good evening, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here to have the opportunity to tell my story again in this beautiful venue. Again, my name is Pierre-Olivier, and I'm going to be telling my story in English, not in French. However, I did write the story in French, and then I translated it with the help of an editor. And so if you do read the anthology, Awfully Hilarious, Stories We Never Tell, my story is in the anthology in English and French. So you may choose the language of your preference. So I feel like always more comfortable in my mother tongue. So I'm always like a little more nervous when I tell the story in English, but it's that's a great opportunity. The anthology was imagined by Hendrie, who's right here with us tonight. So she'll be telling a story as part of this anthology as well, shortly after me. And the story I'm about to tell you is called Tomb Raider, and it's taking place in Turkey, in Istanbul. It's shortly after I graduated from university. I'm free. I'm trying to enjoy my freedom and travel a little bit. And I had I learned the sad news from my mom that she got diagnosed with lung cancer. So I'm by myself, alone, roaming through the city of Istanbul, and I had that news, and I've met a stranger, and this is where I'm gonna start from in the story. So as I'm walking through the crowd in Taksim Square, the main public square of the city of Istanbul, I realized I had no plans for the evening, and suddenly my feeling of loneliness began to resurface. However, maybe my luck was about to change. A local man approached me and asked me if I had a lighter. After answering him in the negative, he went on to ask me where I was from, noticing my foreign accent. One question led to another, and there we were, strolling around the central square. For the extrovert that I am, the company felt quite pleasant. Socializing made me feel less lonely and helped me take my mind off things. The man then invited me for a drink. In my mind, I had two options: give him the benefit of the doubt, or I could listen to the wise recommendations of my guidebook and refuse invitations made by random strangers. Obviously, I opted for the former, but also followed my instinct to remain cautious, even though in my opinion, everyone deserves a chance. Sitting at the bar, I still didn't know if I could trust him, let alone if he was interested in me in a friendly or romantic way. Truth be told, I couldn't figure out what he wanted at all. On the other hand, good company was just what I needed. I decided I had nothing to lose, so I let naivety win. I like his confidence and his attention. Next, he invited me to go to a nightclub. I had a lump in my throat, but the thought of going back to my hostel alone felt even worse. I chose denial over pain. Uncertain and excited at the same time, I got into the cab with him. It was a thrill of adventure all over again. I too had the right to play my own character in Tomb Raider, I thought to myself. Once in the nightclub, the man led me to a seat. He ordered food and drinks. It all seemed to bode well for a good time until, of course, two young women dressed in short skirts and crop tops joined us and cornered me in the back of the booth. The men leaned over to me and bragged that we were going to have, quote unquote, the best fuck of our lives that night. I felt the pressure in my abdomen intensify. Suddenly, everything was clear, crystal clear. What I had hoped would become a romantic encounter had become a nightmare. I felt so ashamed, and as if the situation wasn't embarrassing enough, the waiter kindly informed me, while clearly putting pressure on me, that I would not only have to pay for the tray of food and all the alcohol that the man had already ordered, but also for all the cocktails that the two women had ordered and were about to order. In short, the party was going to be on my back. And at that moment, I realized I was the victim of the let's have a drink scam, exactly as described in my guidebook. Because of the emotional context I was in, I had ignored all the red flags. Even worse, I had ignored my instinct. It was all very well to feel sorry for myself, but I had to get out of this mess. The scantily clad young women clearly did not seem to be interested in me, nor I in them, for that matter. But it was also at that moment that a plan came to my mind, a flash of genius that Lara Croft, my favorite action-adventure character, would herself be proud of. I began to rummage inside my backpack in a nervous and hurried manner, pretending that I had forgotten to take my medication. It was the only ploy I could come up with to get my so-called new friends to let me leave the table. I had told them I needed to go to the bathroom where there was more light and where I could search my bag. I stood in front of a mirror where my mind was going in circles. Could I actually pull this off? I counted 1, 2, 3, and go. I bolted out of the bathroom. I ran at full speed towards the exit at the top of the stairs and ran outside, jumping in the first cab I saw. As the cab made its way back to the hostel, my breathing became calmer and my heart had finally stopped pounding. Thank you very much, everyone.
Oh dear, what an unlikely adventure. Our next writer is Cecilia O'Day, and she is the artist in residence at the Point Artist Run Center. Now, normally or usually an artist as an actor is there working as a writer. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Oh, thank you. It's so lovely to be here in Whistler. I left Australia at 19 and came to Whistler, and I was a ski instructor here and worked for the adaptive program and worked at Whistler Cable 6 back in the day with Ron Saperstein. But I had a wonderful time coming of age in Whistler, and I've been living in Vancouver ever since, and now I'm at the cabin in Alta Lake, thank you, Stephen, at the Arts Point Center, and I'm writing my first play. So Rebecca's just fit me in, and I just wrote a little bit of this in the break, and you guys are the first audience members. To give you a little context, I am a widow. I was widowed at age 31. Zach died from pleomorphic angiosarcoma. And I kind of lost my mind a little bit in grief. So I thought I was good now, but I don't know why I got emotional then. Okay. All right, so this is not meant to be sad. It's just kind of pathetic. All right, this is after he died. Okay. And I'm just going to paint the picture of Zach. Okay, Zach would evaluate burger fillings like a mathematician. This isn't the minute after he died. He didn't eat a burger and die. This is like some time after, about a year after. Zach would evaluate burger fillings like a mathematician solving an equation, calculating the optimal ratio of meat to cheese to bun with the precision of a human calculator. Okay. So there's this quaint little cafe at the end of our street. Let's call it Memory Lane Cafe. Zach and I practically lived there. And after Zach passed away, I had this brilliant idea to immortalize him on their menu. It's the perfect tribute to a guy who could out-eat anyone in a 10-mile radius. So I strutted into Memory Lane Cafe to break the news about his tragic passing, and I pitched my genius plan. Now, let's talk about chalkboard menus, shall we? You've got your artisanal avocado toast and your locally sourced kale salad, but Where, oh, where is the Zack Attack burger? Picture this, 3 juicy beef patties stacked with gooey melted cheddar, crispy bacon, a generous drizzle of maple bourbon barbecue sauce. It's a heart attack waiting to happen. They didn't budge. I even bargained with a vegetarian version, the garden Zackwich. But nope, nada. I'm not sure we feel comfortable naming a menu item after a dead guy, they said. What do you mean by that? Who wouldn't want to sink their teeth into a burger named after a guy who ate lots of burgers and now is dead? Their hearts were colder than their iced lattes. So I pleaded and I begged. I even offered to scrub dishes for a month if they'd just consider my proposal. But they said to me, move on. I mean, they may have said, move on to the side, because there was a line forming behind me, but I heard the words move on. And I said, oh, I guess a frickin' tribute to my late husband, your loyal customer for years, doesn't quite fit your menu aesthetic. But hey, who needs a heartfelt fucking gesture when you've got overpriced fucking lattes? Don't worry, I'll be leaving a fucking Yelp review. Who knew honoring someone's memory could be so complicated? But hey, if you can't make lemonade out of lemons, then you write a strongly worded letter to the health department. I didn't do that, but I do have another one, but I don't have to share if you're on a time limit.
That's great.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cecilia. And thank you for being so brave also, and just coming up to me in the break and saying, I've got something. Our next reader is Heather Hendrie. She is a Whistler nature-based therapist and writer, originally from Guelph, Ontario. Heather's intimate writing style draws on her varied life experiences and work as a clinical counselor to remind us all that in our tough or embarrassing moments, we are not alone. Heather's published a best-selling anthology, Awfully Hilarious, We Never Tell, and her second anthology in the series, Period Pieces, tells truth in an attempt to end shame around menstruation and menopause. Thank you, Heather. Come on up. It's so wonderful to be here tonight. It's really an honor to be able to share with these other writers. And wow, Cecilia, I can't believe you just came up with that on the break. Can't wait to see more of your stuff. And I had a great conversation with some of the other writers about axolotls over the break. So that was really fun. The piece I'm going to read is actually the inciting incident that created this book. I went on a terrible date, called up a friend. She said, oh, I've been on my fair share of terrible online dates. We could write a book. And then ping, we did. This is called Parachute Boy, and spoiler alert, the alternate titles I considered for this piece included Unhinged and That Red Bag is Kind of a Red Flag. I hadn't been on a date in a long time when I met Parachute Boy, and I'm pretty sure it was my first IRL, or in real life time, meeting a man from the dating app called Hinge. Let's just say my experience led to my nearly coming unhinged. I pull my little black Honda Fit off the highway and into a parking lot. I'm wearing something pretty cute, actually, because I dressed for the drink we were planning to have. About an hour before drink time, Parachute Boy texted to say, want to meet at the Chief instead? The Squamish Chief, and I imagine many of you here tonight may know of it, is a stunning granite monolith, one of North America's largest and sacred to the Squamish Nation. This mountain now draws outdoor enthusiasts from around the world to enjoy the short summer season living in their vans, walking slack lines in their yoga pants, and eating leftovers. Today, the site draws adventure seekers of all ilk, those who would climb, the hikers, the climbers, the mountaineers, and highliners who literally walk tight ropes from peak to peak, and those who would jump off, these being the paragliders and the base jumpers. They come soaring in like flies to honey the second the winter rains stop. Moments after I park, a huge rusted out truck rolls in and a short-ish man leaps out. I know it's the person I'm here to meet because he's got the same man bun as in his pictures, and he's walking towards me. With my curly red hair, I tend to stand out in a crowd, which has had the at times convenient side benefit
of making it easy for my online dates to find me. Sometimes I wish they wouldn't. I begin to stroll towards him, smiling. I notice his nice blue eyes and his large red backpack. We begin to hike the trail together, and I learn quickly that he's a logger. I'm a wilderness therapist and environmental activist, turned on in the 90s by the logging blockades in defense of the old-growth forests of Clayoquot Sound. He's recently returned from cutting old growth, right around that same area. It's hard to say why I'm even on this date in the first place, but if I'm honest, it's because he asked me out and nobody's done that in a while. I'm also trying to move on from a lovely man I've been stuck on for the past year, and you know how the saying goes, the best way to get over one man. What's much harder to determine than why I went on the date is why I stayed once I learned of the contents of his enormous red backpack. I have never been good at playing it cool, so I always ask early on, do you want to have kids? Just kidding, that was my last date. This time I say, so what's with the huge backpack? Oh, it's my wing, he says. I never hike the Chief without it. It's a thing in this town. Depending on wind conditions, people like to hike up this huge rock, jump off the top, and soar down. To do so, they carry up a sort of a parachute called a wing, which for the record is not my thing. The temperature drops and I'm suddenly freezing. Before I proceed, and for this to make sense to the layperson not living in the sea to sky corridor, present company excluded, I need to explain that I live in the kind of gorgeously epic small coastal mountain town that draws in a lot of folks who self-medicate with adrenaline. There are days when I could have been counted in that number. It becomes quite clear early on that this is the case with this man, who has self-identified as such, both by way of his wing and by letting me know 5 minutes in that he is 37 years old and lives in his van. This in response to his questions to me, how old are you and do you own a house? When I learn of the parachute in his backpack, I pursue my line of questioning a moment longer. So, like, do you plan to use it? Depending on the conditions. I should have bolted to my car at that point, but instead I quipped, the conditions of the date? No, the wind conditions, he states, looking at me like I was totally missing the plot.
Oh, gosh, hilarious. Our next author is Leanne Dunic, and she transgresses genres and form to produce projects such as 1.5 of You by Talon Books in 2021, To Love the Coming End by Book Hug and Chin Music Press in 2017, and The Gift by Book Hug in 2019. Her most recent work is a lyric novel with photographs entitled Wet. She is the leader of the band, The Deep Cove, and lives on the unceded and occupied traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Thank you. Let's welcome Leanne.
Howdy. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Tatiana, wherever you went. And Sarah for selling the books, and the volunteers, and for all of you for coming this evening. This is the Canadian debut of me reading from this new book, which hasn't even been launched yet. It's being launched on Wednesday. So it's very special to share this moment with you in Whistler. Yeah, so this is my book, Wet. I started it in 2015. And for those of you who are from BC, you may remember that in 2015, there were a lot of forest fires happening that summer. And it was a really hard thing to experience and continues to be a really hard thing to experience. But after that summer, I went to Singapore for an artist residency. And over there, the Indonesian forest fires had been going on for many months, and there was a really bad haze that was hanging over Singapore, and it was so bad that people couldn't leave their houses because I don't know what the acronym is, but it was 1800, which is just like hard to even conceive. So people were told to stay indoors and not go to school or work or whatever. So I went to Singapore just at the end of this drought. And it was the rainy season, so the rains were supposed to come, but they didn't. And so I was there at the end, And I was like, I went from one fire to another fire, and it was hard for me not to think that the world was burning. So that was what started this book. It took me a long time to finish this book because it's been a while since 2015. Lots of things in the world changed. Like when I started this book, wearing masks was a new thing, you know? Now it's not so much a new thing. Anyways, the narrator of this book is a fashion model. I did that too a long time ago. So this book is based on a lot of my experiences. One of the experiences being when I was living in Singapore at this time, I was watching the migrant workers build a condo across the street when I was staying indoors when the air was bad. And I was trying to understand why these people were told it's okay to work and build this condo without any personal protection, but other people were told to stay indoors. And so that was a big thought process that was happening to me, like why do some people's lives matter and others don't? And then that continued beyond human lives, but also non-human lives. And so that's basically what this book is about. So I'm just gonna read from sections throughout. This book is written in a bit of an experimental format. As you can see, it doesn't look like your typical novel. It also has photographs. And so, yeah, I'm just gonna read 3 different sections. When I worked in Shanghai last year, the model I shared bunk beds with screamed into her pillow every night. She suggested I try it. She had been modeling for years. Now, an extra $400 is deducted from my earnings each month so I can sleep alone. Luxury living. An air conditioning unit hangs over my single mattress. Opposite mine, another bed without sheets. I brush a dead moth from my pillowcase, smearing its shimmering essence on cotton. Above, water rushes through pipes. An echo from the stairwell, someone clipping their nails. In Shanghai, the apartments were so cold that I slept in my winter boots and coat with my hat and scarf draped over my face. I awoke to cockroaches scuttling along the kitchen counter. Here, I wake up with a sweaty sheen and ants in the kitchen. The view, a cotton battened sky. Visibility, 2 blocks. Below, a gouged out urban hole. A metal dragon lowers a flat, then another, in a slow game of Tetris. Migrant workers wear canary-colored hard hats and boots, towels around necks, torn fabric for masks. I share this flat with a 15-year-old model from Poland and one from Russia who is the same age as me. A domestic helper from China sleeps on a futon behind the living room bookcase. None of us talk much. Fluorescent orange netting sections off walkways around the condo construction site, the kind found on oceanic garbage islands, strangling seabirds and turtles. I grab a coffee and bun from a hip cafe and notice the absence of tip jars. I think about the burrito joint in Ballard with a handmade sign, "Mark got shot. Let's help him with his medical bills." Next door, a shop sells goldfish and turtles festering in plastic bags. I buy an ice cream sandwich from the stall at my housing estate. Flat with the quickly melting vanilla edge, smooth, layer after layer. I pass 3 construction workers washing their hands in a bucket of gray water. Make eye contact with one. I look away, look back. He does not smile, eyes fixed on me. I wasn't born a worker. Small puddles form on the ground as the men clean themselves. Pigeons drink the water. Sometimes I take the bus rather than the MRT so that I can map this world I've fallen into. CCTV watches from points A to B. Cameras are everywhere once you notice them. I've watched men stretch prata dough behind hot grills on Northbridge Road, wandered the crowded clothing stalls of Bugas, explored the temples on Serangoon Road. On Sundays, I stroll to Little India to see the boys hold hands and wonder why men in other cultures aren't as free to share their affections with one another. Also in Little India, I watched a man cry as he was taken away by police. My cousin told me about Mao's campaign during the Great Leap Forward to kill 4 pests: flies, rats, mosquitoes, sparrows. The people banged pots incessantly to prevent sparrows from resting. Soft stones dropped from the sky. What other animals fell? 55 million people, my ancestors. In this block, poisoned bread is left on the sidewalk for pigeons, for cats, for dogs, the hungry. As she kneads my foot, my masseuse asks me where I'm from. I return the question. Her, Sabah, Malaysia. Speaks English, Tagalog, and Bahasa Malayu. I'm surprised by her strength. She's 20. I'm only 4 years older, but weak and basically monolingual. Models must stay hydrated, eat non-greasy food, no chocolate. Exercise regularly. The agency stresses the importance of staying fair. Use whitening cream and an umbrella when walking under the sun. I don't always abide by these rules. On the way to an audition, a faint voice says behind me, "Miss?" I turn around. A man stands timidly a few feet away from me. He points to himself. Me, Tamil, India person, no work. I know I only have $10 and that I need it for my lunch today. Surely he needs it too. I hand him a $2 bill, hoping I get this job and that the next time I can give him more. A rat runs across the sidewalk, then back again. He looks in my direction and runs towards me. I casually step to the side as the rat continues into the bushes. This is how I make friends. Women pull at my inner thighs to fit me into their shapewear. They talk around me. Do they think I don't understand because of my American accent? Naughty girl shaves her chibai. Once absorbed into the nude-colored body-shaping undergarment, I walk the show with the other size 0 models. My shoes are too small, but I smile and sashay in this unsightly underwear like I'm fucking Cinderella. Or like I need the $500. Train station at dusk. Hundreds of birds and trees. This urban space in their migratory path, a mania. No rain, but thousands of liters of high-pressured water clean these roads each night. If this equatorial summer is over, why do fires continue? Nature is failing. She burns and burns, forgetting what it feels like to be wet. And me, weathering, a salted cup, waiting for damp. Nearby forests scorch, not a sky-born drop, yet water pours from faucets. I only shower when I have to. Bathroom tiles like chiclets, under a layer of eggshell paint, a line of ants embalmed. Cats wail in the alley. Should I leave a dish of water out for animals, or will that only breed mosquitoes? Who gets to survive? Fires consume bodies. We wear white masks to filter toxic breaths. Dear pigeon, your body is a rain-filled cloud. 2 strips of night band each wing. The aurora of your neck must magnetize you to earth. Why are you so anxious? You've made maps, but the city changes. You're famished, but the bread you've eaten crumbles your bones. In imagination, in reality, we are many things, all that we try to contain. Are there any Crowded House fans in the audience? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Okay, awesome. Me too. So I had this poem or section or whatever that I wrote with Crowded House titles, but I couldn't put it in the book because of rights. So I'm going to read it for you. There's a little sneak thing, and then that will be my last reading. Crowded House and I talk about past, present, and future summers. Sun shines on the black clouds hanging over the domain. Dust from a distant sun showers over everyone. That kind of view don't need an explanation. Everything is good for you if it doesn't kill you. Been waiting so long for these walls to crack. Every summer is a recurring dream. Ice will melt, water will boil. I beg the endless summers to lift this curse. No way to break this spell, don't tell. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much, Leanne. That was astonishing and powerful, and I think we're all feeling that little bit of anxiety about this coming summer. So hopefully it will be wet. And you can get Leanne's book with Sarah there. She has all of the magic to make it happen. And I would just like to say thank you so much for coming and sharing your words and listening to words. And we should do it again sometime. Thanks, guys.